likewise, the chord between the two fish is actually crucial as well, because with the chord comes tension and connection and a sense of captivity, that these fish aren't completely free to just swim away and do their own thing. There's like a evident split between the two fish, but they're connected on some deeper level, which I think really speaks to what the sign is all about. One fish is swimming upwards towards transcendence and redemption, and another fish is swimming down towards chaos and disillusion.
Greetings from the Pacific Northwest. You're listening to Symbolic Studies episode 14. I'm your host Mario, once again joined by my lovely wife Michelle. Today we'll be discussing the symbolism of Pisces, the 12th and final sign of the zodiac. If you're new to the show, I have regular contributors and invite guests to submit a voicemail on the topic at hand. I also play voicemails submitted by listeners like yourself. For more information about the show, my services, or how to submit a voicemail, please visit symbolicstudies.com. If you'd like to have access to early and exclusive content, please consider becoming a member on my site, Patreon, YouTube, or on the Symbolic Studies Substack. But before we dive into these voicemails, Michelle, my dear, how are you?
Things are good. I'm very excited for Pisces season, excited to record, because I gotta say, through my studies and preparing for today's show, I have a newfound appreciation for Pisces and what it represents. I feel like I've come to a handful of personal conclusions with the sign that has helped me see a new side of it and to really just gain more insight. So I'm looking forward to getting into it today.
Well, right on. I'm excited as well. Of course, there is a lot of information encapsulated within Pisces. It's often said that Pisces really represents the whole entire zodiac, being the final sign of the astrological year. We also can't forget that water is one of the most profound, mysterious, deepest elements that we have around. And of course, fish and water are intimately related. So to kick things off, we've got a voicemail from Jord, our special guest for this episode.
So I just want to kick this off by thanking Mario and Michelle and everybody at Symbolic Studies for letting me contribute to this segment. I'm always happy to speak about the zodiac, but especially when we get an opportunity to approach it symbolically, because the signs are often looked at as like personal beliefs or like labels that people can wear instead of what they actually are, which is like archetypal, symbolic structures. And of all of them, I would say Pisces is probably the most symbolically dense of all of the signs. And if you can see that just by looking at the symbol itself, the sort of two fish swimming in different directions, connected by this tether, this umbilical cord, but nevertheless swimming in different directions. There's like a whole teaching contained just in the symbology, just in the glyph of Pisces, which is so easy to overlook as, oh, the dreamy sign, oh, the imaginative sign, oh, the intuitive sign. Not that that's not true, but it's so much more than that. It's all of those things and almost the opposite at the same time. It's the nature of these mutable signs like Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, Pisces, that they have this dual nature to them. And likewise, the chord between the two fish is actually crucial as well, because with the chord comes tension and connection and a sense of captivity, that these fish aren't completely free to just swim away and do their own thing. There's like a evident split between the two fish, but they're connected on some deeper level, which I think really speaks to what the sign is all about. One fish is swimming upwards towards transcendence and redemption, and another fish is swimming down towards chaos and disillusion. And it's that dual movement that defines Pisces symbolically. Now, when you bring in Jupiter as the kind of traditional sign ruler, traditionally Jupiter belonging to Pisces, or rather Pisces belonging to Jupiter, then you imbue the sign with all this added meaning of what Jupiter is necessarily about, like faith and moral structure and divine order. But Jupiter doesn't just rule Pisces, he rules Sagittarius. And in these two different signs, we kind of see the two different sides of Jupiter. In Sagittarius, it's all about outward expansion and truth seeking and exploring and setting goals and striving towards them. It's a very masculine outwards expression of Jupiter. But in Pisces, we get the same energy of Jupiter, which is growth and abundance and expansion, but it turns inwards. It's a feminine principle. So it's Jupiter interiorized. It's expansion inwards. It's looking into the self, finding meaning, finding faith. And this is why Pisces often, I think, is a difficult archetype for people to understand. Jupiter is what gives Pisces its teleology and its purpose. And unfortunately, for those of you who are listening to this who are Piscean, the purpose of Pisces appears to be suffering and redemption and sacrifice. The symbolic logic behind Pisces is one of sort of salvation, which is why you cannot get, I will not be able to get through talking about Pisces for 10 minutes without at least bringing up the name Jesus Christ, who is probably symbolically the most Piscean figure of all time, the most sort of Jupiterian figure of all time. Interestingly, as with all these kind of later signs in the wheel, there's not just one traditional rulership, there's a modern rulership as well. And of course, to Pisces, we collectively have assigned Neptune. Jupiter and Neptune kind of co-rule. It's the fusion of Jupiterian expansion and Neptunian delusion and fantasy and mysticism. Jupiter and Neptune fusing together that really defines the sign of Pisces. Now, Neptune as a planet and as an archetype, but mainly as a planet, is a really, really interesting thing because it's discovered in the 19th century. It's a really new planet. And with Neptune, as Neptune kind of comes into our consciousness, or into our solar system, however you want to put it, so do all of these Neptunian things. It brings with it heavy Neptunian themes, romanticism, photography, cinema, the invention of painkillers and anesthesia, morphine, the mass proliferation of morphine, spiritualism, and all of these kind of collective delusions that are attached to the sign of Neptune. That kind of period of the 19th century, 1830s, I believe, when Neptune was discovered, very delusional time. And a time that birthed a lot of technology that we still use today in order to delude and to cope and to placate ourselves, which is kind of what Neptune represents. Symbolically, Neptune is all about boundaries and the dissolution of boundaries. But the boundaries between the self and the other, the boundaries between realities and fantasies, or between, the material world and the dream world, the boundary between image and substance. So when modern astrology assigns Neptune to Pisces with Jupiter, I don't think it's like arbitrary. I think it actually represents something very symbolically meaningful and very symbolically coherent, because Pisces is the fusion of Jupiter and Neptune. It's faith and social beliefs and values, which is what Jupiter represents, infused with illusion, infused with mystification. I don't think there is a more mystic sign or a more tapped in, spiritually speaking, clairvoyant, clairsentient, other world. I'm yet to meet a Pisces person or a person with very strong Pisces placements who hasn't had some kind of clairvoyant experience in their life, some kind of very deep, meaningful, symbolic experience. And really, when we look at the last 2,000 years and the aeonic shift that we're going through, the great year divided into 12, so to speak, the astrological aeon, and the fact that we have spent the last 2,000 years in the aeon of Pisces, in the age of Pisces, and we're now transitioning, or have transitioned, depending on who you ask, into the age of Aquarius. I think if we look back at the last 2,000 years, if we look back at the age of Pisces and we look back at the figure of Jesus Christ, who is this Jupiterian Piscean figure come to earth, in the form of man in the age of Pisces, who really represents the values of the sign and of the age, we can kind of understand it a little bit better. If you consider that the first ever symbol before the crucifix or the cross for the early Christians was actually the ichthys, the fish. That Jesus describes himself as a fisher of men and calls his apostles fishermen, and that they're baptized in water. You can start to see the kind of Piscean correlations into Jesus and to Christianity. Christ is historically, just so happens to be in the Piscean era, but I actually think historically, symbolically, he actually embodies the Piscean era, which is all about compassion, all about suffering, all about dissolving your own ego and becoming one with God. My will be done, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's sort of pure Pisces symbolism. And when you scale the Piscean archetype up to civilization, what you actually get, if you look at peak Pisces, what is the peak Piscean period? Well, it's high medieval times. It's Gothic cathedrals that stretch up to heaven, where even in the way that the cathedral is built, every room, every object, every ornament has some kind of Piscean symbolic resonance to it. When you look at monasteries, the monasteries of medieval times, the asceticism of medieval times, people flagellating themselves and being martyrs in medieval times, people having very direct, transcendent spiritual experiences, saints performing miracles in medieval times, then you really start to understand the symbolism that kind of governs the psyche of Pisces. And yeah, I mean, look, I think it was a beautiful period, the age of Pisces, a beautiful, romantic, artistic, creative period. But we also have to acknowledge that it was a period filled with mass hysteria and with crusades and with people being kind of lost in the source of divine mysteries. Almost as if, for the last 2,000 years, Neptune had overwhelmed Jupiter and glamored him into a stupor. So if you bring this back to the image, if you think about these two fish that can't really separate themselves, spirit and disillusion tied together, mysticism and delusion tied together, compassion and self-erasure tied together, then you start to really understand what Pisces is. And when you apply that to the people born under the sign, to those people with Pisces suns or Pisces moons, I always like the idea that every sign of the zodiac can be ascribed a verb. The Aries is I am, and Taurus is I have, and Gemini is I run my mouth or whatever, I yap too much. But the Pisces is I let go. I forgive, I dissolve, I surrender. That's the kind of energy that we're looking at with Pisces. Of course, we're looking at water in its final form, the ocean, the deepest depths of the human unconscious. And you see this in Piscean people. A red pill for me, reading so many people's natal charts, was the idea that so many Pisces people just went through the world feeling things at a deep, intuitive, imaginative, emotional level, in the way that air people, water people, even other water signs like Cancers and Scorpios don't quite feel the world in the same way, the same intense way. This is why probably there's a proclivity for Pisces people to be drug addicts, why so many Pisces people end up in prison. But I think our modern understanding of the sign is quite weak. We only tend to see the turn the other cheek side of Pisces. We don't tend to see the medieval, Gothic, pious, highly symbolic side of the sign. And when you consider both sides to it, when you consider that, yeah, Jesus turns the other cheek, but he also comes bringing a sword. When you consider that, yeah, sure, we've got Neptune, but we've also got Jupiter in there, then we really start to understand, I think, what the sign represents. But I'm waffling now. I'm yapping. I just want to thank Mario, and I want to thank Michelle, and I want to thank Symbolic Studies. If you want to find me, my name is Jordan, but everyone calls me Jord. It's at Jord. I make videos about this type of stuff. But yeah, it's a fascinating science, one that's always intrigued me and probably always will. Despite me knowing so many of them and being so drawn towards them, they continue to elude me. Definitely the most mystic and one of the most difficult signs to understand.
All right, Jord, thank you so much for that voicemail. That was excellent. And yeah, I mean, I can co-sign with so much of what you said there. The most mystical sign, I can totally see it, of course. And people often say that Scorpio is perhaps one of the more mystical signs. I think there's a few contenders there, but I do think it's interesting that we're talking about two water signs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also, everything you had to say about Christ and sort of Christianity or Jesus embodying the Piscean age, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you brought up the ichthys fish being the early symbol of Christianity. My understanding was this symbol was used actually in secrecy And so it was a way for Christians in the know to sort of signal to each other that they were Christians. This was before it became the official religion of Rome. That's my understanding of things. Also, just have to say that the Piscean correspondence, or the watery correspondence with Christianity, also extends over to the practice of baptism. And so even, it's interesting, the official name for a baptismal font, I believe in Latin, is piscina, which means fish pond. So that makes sense. People have also called followers of Christ fish. I think it's interesting as well that nuns are referred to as such, when in Hebrew, nun or nun actually literally means fish. People have also pointed out that the Pope, one of his hats, one of these classic hats that he wears, is basically emulating the fish head, a fish head. And of course, there's actually a lot of groups out there where they believe that their sages, their highest, most tuned in sages, were either fish people or they came here via a fish. So some people say they came from the stars, but the way they traveled here was by fish. As an example, the 7 rishis in India, they're oftentimes depicted riding a large fish. And even sometimes the fish itself is the wise one, is the sage. And so the fish being a traveler, I'm just going to throw this out there, that the fish has also been viewed as a psychopomp, as being able to go between realms, right? And so Christ represents this in many different ways. So according to mythology, he's incarnate, he's of the flesh, but of course he has this relationship with the other side, the divine realm, God, etc. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying our discussion on Pisces symbolism so far. If you aren't already aware, I have a series called Symbolic Secrets that's only available for members. I've released 18 episodes so far. Each one is a full-length symbolic lecture on all of the major arcana cards, from the Fool to the Star card, with the 4 remaining cards coming this year. That's nearly 20 hours worth of exclusive video lectures. You can access all of these videos with the membership on Patreon, YouTube, Substack, or symbolicstudies.com. Membership, by the way, is also the perfect way to support the show for only $5 a month. This also gets you early access to every podcast, like the one you're listening to now. All right, back to our episode on the symbolism of Pisces. I also love what you mentioned about Jupiter's inward expansion, if you will, and I think that makes a lot of sense. In fact, the way I've heard it and what makes sense to me is that we actually have 2 faces symbolically, one facing outward. This is facing the external realm. This is facing the physical realm. And then we also have a face looking inward. And so this represents the internal journey, the spiritual journey, and things like that. So when you mention Jupiter's inward dynamic, it reminds me of this symbolic spiritual face that we have looking inside. And I believe you have something to say about that, right, babe?
Yeah, Jord, thank you so much for your contribution. So many things are firing off from the things you brought up. And in particular, the inward expansion that you mentioned that correlates to Jupiter. And when I think of Pisces as kind of like a quiet sign. There's something happening below the waters. And I think that this goes along with the inward expansion because I'm thinking of a fish being under the water and how much of its movement and its action and its life that we never, ever see until it maybe jumps up to the surface to get a bug or whatever it's doing on the surface. And so this inward expansion with Jupiter, to me, kind of goes along with this quietness that I feel with Pisces and the quiet that is required to have proper inward thought and contemplation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the authors I really appreciate, his name is W.H. Mueller. I've talked about him before, but he was saying in regards to Pisces being the 2 fish, that it's the reconciliation of opposites. And the reconciliation of opposites occurs in the center, this sacred center. It doesn't happen externally, it happens within. So the quiet dynamic that you're referring to makes a ton of sense. Also, with the fish, oftentimes you're seeing the fish almost kind of like a yin-yang symbol, where they're circling each other or they're chasing each other's tail or something like that. This implies sort of the axis or the axle of a wheel, which always relates to stillness and calmness and everything else. It's the external part of the wheel that's more so related to action. That's always related to the material realm and things of that sort. And to add to this, let me ask you, my dear, what sound does a fish make?
That's a good question. Not many sounds that I've ever heard a fish make.
Right.
If anything, it's more of the sound of a fish slapping against water.
Right. So they internally, or just by themselves, they do not make a sound.
Right.
You know, a lamb, a cat, a dog, a bird, they all make sounds. So I actually never thought about this quiet dynamic with the fish, but that does make sense.
Yeah, I like it. I also have some thoughts on what Jord was talking about when he brought up the more dreamlike, intuitive, illusory side of Pisces. He mentioned morphine. And morphine, a lot of people know, is made to help reduce pain. And morphine is derived and comes from the opium poppy plant. Now, I have such a deep affinity for this flower and plant. And when he brought up morphine, I was very excited because my mind went to the effect that opium has on us, which is putting us into a dream-like state. And it simulates dream time in the way that what it does is it helps to take your mind off of pain. And it does have pain-reducing properties, no doubt, but it's the state of mind that it puts you into and the relaxation that comes. And I wanted to talk about this from a book that I really love and recommend. It's called Opium for the Masses, Harvesting Nature's Best Pain Medication. This is by Jim Hogshire. And in this, he writes, as opiate receptors load up, fear and anxiety disappear, and the patient feels detached from discomfort. This feeling of detachment is the most important feature of opiate analgesia. If measured purely for its ability to alleviate the sensation of pain, morphine, opium, or any of the others would score no better than aspirin. It is the perception of pain that opium alters and that makes all the difference in the world. And I can speak from experience with this that having an opium tincture is probably one of the most important things you could have in your home apothecary, because when you are going through pain, the first thing you want to do is try and forget about it. And that's why opium is so great. That's why it can be addictive, though, too, because it can take you into these dreamlike states and leave you swimming in the sea of illusions and just not having to deal with the pains of everyday life, which is why that it needs to be used with respect and wisdom and knowledge. But the thing that I really love about this connection with Pisces is this side of it and this side of the medicine. The other way that I see a correspondence with Poppy and Pisces is what Jord mentioned about the age of Pisces with art and creation and more just artistic types finding inspiration through the natural world. And through my research about poppy and opium, a lot of the types of people that were attracted to using opium were more eccentric. They were artists, they were musicians, they were poets. And I find it very interesting because there is some sort of mysterious intrigue around opium and around the opium dens and what happened in there. And that to me is very Piscean. And lastly, to conclude the dreamy side of Pisces, from what I can gather and what other people talk about is that opium actually suppresses the REM stage of sleep. So you're not going into a deep sleep. So some people will argue that what you're quote unquote dreaming about actually could be more of a hallucination.
Oh, that's really interesting as well, because fish, my understanding is that they actually don't literally go to sleep. In fact, they can't even close their eyes.
Right.
And that's one of the symbolic aspects of the fish, is that they're always sort of vigilant and they're always aware. And they don't sleep like other animals.
Hello, Mari and Michelle. Firstly, I want to wish you guys happy anniversary, happy birthday to the Symbolic Studies podcast. 1 year ago, that I guess that makes the podcast a Pisces sun, like myself. If I haven't already said it to you and Michelle directly, I really do love and appreciate the format of the podcast. It's exciting every time to learn new insights from all the different voices and interpretations. as it's also really helping me piece together a broad overview of the zodiac signs. So thank you once again for creating this space, as well as allowing me to share some of my insights and musings. So let's dive into the watery depths of Pisces, a sign that I've obviously studied all my life, being a Pisces sun. In fact, I got into astrology at the age of 11. But I remember one of my earlier books described Pisces as the dustbin of the zodiac. And at the time, I took a bit of offense being considered a dustbin. But the argument was that being the last sign of the zodiac, they had accumulated many of the traits of the previous 11 signs. As after all, water is a universal solvent, easily absorbing and dissolving its environment. But since then, I've come to understand that we are all dustbins of the zodiac, as we contain within us all 12 houses of the signs, as influenced by the 7 traditional planets, plus some more new ones. We are, after all, not just our sun sign. And this probably goes back to the idea of, fractals of the one. And I remember learning from that first astrology book, which coincidentally was by someone called Katriena, published in 1985, that Pisces has many shadow aspects, describing the two fish swimming in opposite directions as having the potential to be either the sinner or the saint. And we can be about extremes of the polarities, and this often displays itself in our susceptibility to addictions. Sex, drugs, alcohol are very Dionysian. As we see with the case of alcohol, it has very extracting qualities, making it a powerful agent in herbalism to amplify the qualities of a plant. And so with Pisces, everything seems amplified, especially our emotions and dream life. But I also want to point to the phrase sinner or saint. I also see contained within this phrase the addiction to either intoxication or indoctrination, as Pisces is also the sign most linked to religious cults and fanaticism as the expression of that extreme. Now I'd like to offer up an alternative interpretation of the zodiac and this sign. Now, some people actually relate the zodiac to the 12 labors of Hercules, but I'm beginning to see the 12 signs in a different light, more as a kind of birth calendar system that was encoding knowledge about the different phases of human procreation based on the ancient belief of birth, death, and most of all, the reincarnation of the ancestors. Isn't it funny we find the word labor in the 12 labors of Hercules? So it makes me wonder if it's alluding to the labors of conception, pregnancy, and childbirth rites. After all, what does an astrologer do but interpret our birth chart? So here I'd like to propose the sign of Pisces is encoding the birth of the child. To be exact, the fetus and the placenta connected by the umbilical cord. So let's take a step back for a moment. In the Capricorn episode, I brought up the goat symbolism being linked to midwifery via such Sumerian goddesses as Babagula, and including others like the Fates and the Weavers, who were all traditional midwives. And then in Aquarius, I related the containers to the amniotic sacs, the waters as the amniotic fluid that floods once the sacs rupture in the labor contractions, and that the fish, sometimes depicted in the waters of Aquarian deities like Enki or Namu, are emblematic of the fetus. Ironically, Pisces is associated with the feet, and here I am referring to the fish as the feet-us. Now, the double fish, like other doubles in the zodiac, relate a lot to twin symbolism or duality. And here I want to take a page out of our good old mate, Slick Dissident. Shout out to his YouTube channel, Slick Dissident. And he's someone who He raves. I've never seen a man who raves so much about the placenta symbolism, and I love him for that. I really appreciate it. So back in January, in my Substack on the Venus Diaries, I wrote an extensive research on, which I titled Fairy Godmothers and Guardian Angels, where I looked particularly at the ancient laws or belief systems around the placenta. I essentially did a cross-cultural comparison of beliefs surrounding the placenta, and I can safely conclude that it originates from a very ancient primordial belief, still practiced by many indigenous cultures today even, that the placenta, also known as the afterbirth or second birth, because after delivering the fetus, the woman goes through birthing contractions once again to deliver the placenta that's still connected to the child through the umbilical cord. For this reason, many cultures have perceived the placenta as the twin or double of the child, often referring to them as a secret helper, a guardian angel, or in the Greek, daimon, which meant like a spirit helper, which Christianity later on bastardized the word to what we know today as demon, in the context of an evil spirit. So we can see here how the twin symbolism that repeats in many ancient myths. Notice how one twin is always killed by the other, or one twin is mortal and the other immortal. This is because at birth, upon the cutting of the umbilical cord, which is attached to the child's navel, linked to the placenta, this symbolized the sacrifice of the other, the sacrifice of the twin, the placenta, for the baby's life. The placenta is the sacrificial twin. In this way, too, the serpentine coiled cord, umbilical cord, fused to the infant via the navel now makes sense why snake or serpent symbolism is one of the most ancient and repeated motifs, as it was long observed as having a connection to humans in the procreation process, as I guess ancient people correlated the similarities via this science of patterns, observing similarities between the umbilical cord and the snake. Hence, we have many myths of slaying snakes and serpents or dragons, etc., because there was always the risk of death upon the child's birth in the event that the cord was wrapped around their neck, strangling them. Hence, the hero myth is encoding a birth myth. As I'm on the topic of umbilical cord, which, as I mentioned, fused onto the baby's navel, which we know in medical astrology relates Pisces' opposite sign of Virgo, Virgo being the ruler over the navel. And Jupiter, the traditional ruler of Pisces, as well as the sign of Pisces, they both rule over the pituitary gland, which is actually pivotal to childbirth process in producing and releasing hormones like oxytocin and prolactin, which facilitate the delivery of the child through the labor pains. It helps the woman withstand the labor pains, as well as foster that bond between the infant and mother and stimulate breast milk production. Jupiter also rules over the liver. And would you know that the placenta, which medically speaking is also a genetic double of the child, the placenta acted as the liver, kidneys, and lungs for the fetus while it developed in the womb. Now, before I wrap up this placenta symbolism, I know Mario is going to really appreciate this, but I discovered there is an Egyptian relic called the Nama palette. It's a stone tablet dated to around 3400 BC. That is one of the earliest known depictions of an Egyptian king or pharaoh. And it shows the king being preceded in a procession by a priest in front of him, and immediately in front of the priest are four men holding poles or banners like flagpoles. At the last pole, on the fourth man, many scholars have interpreted that what the fourth pole is holding is the placenta, as the placenta sits on top of this pole, and it has this sort of bilobe or oval shape-like structure. and it seems to resemble the umbilical cord still attached to it. So it's the placenta with the umbilical cord just hanging off it at the very top of the fourth pole. I therefore interpret the Egyptian Ka, which was believed to be the life force or the essence of a person, is represented in Egyptian art as a second image or double, like in the case of the royal Ka. It's the pharaoh's double, because Egyptians call the placenta the twin or the secret helper. And this probably explains why so many cultures treated the placenta with great reverence, often having its own elaborate burial ritual, or some even retaining or preserving pieces of the placenta or the umbilical cord to be used at the death of the person in funerary rites as part of the rebirth or reincarnation process. In the Old Testament, this temporary organ, the placenta, is referred to as the seat of the external soul or the bundle of life. This also reminded me a lot about the story I heard growing up, which was based on Plato's myth of the missing half, contained in the Symposium. It's the story of Zeus, or Jupiter, splitting the original human. They were originally created as two beings joined with 4 arms and 4 legs. And after Zeus split them apart, he condemns them to spend their lives in search of the other half. Our placentas were once viewed as our guardian angel, our spirit double that acted as guides. And this probably explains why the sign of Pisces is most associated with the idea of the soul. And ironically, it governs the soul, S-O-L-E, soles of our feet. And finally, I just want to touch briefly on the tarot card that I most associate with Pisces, the 12th card of the major arcana, the Hanged Man, for the 12th sign of Pisces. We see in the card a T-shaped or Tau cross, from which a man hangs from the feet with arms folded behind his back, and a halo-like crown around his head. So as you know, days leading up to labor, the fetus turns in the womb with the head pointed downwards, known head-first descent into the world. Medically, this is termed cephalic presentation, with arms tucked in, as you don't want the baby to emerge via its shoulders or with its hands raised. That will make it a very difficult or even life-threatening delivery. The Hanged Man card even resembles a Sumerian cylinder seal of what looks like a water goddess, most likely Namu or Babagula, depicting symbols around her like the sea goat at her feet and an 8-pointed star near her head, with water pouring out of her shoulders, whilst she's holding with her left hand a child by the feet, with the arms folded behind the back. This seal has been interpreted as a childbirth scene, and therefore I see a lot of resemblance with the position of the Hanged Man. And finally, bringing it back to Hercules, this constellation is sometimes known or called the Kneeler, as he is in a same kneeling position that we see in the star card, which we met in the Aquarius episode. And interestingly, this is what's called a kneeling lunge, and it's known as a birth position, as it opens up the mid-pelvis region that aids fetal descent and can also help to rotate the fetus. And curiously, in 10,000 BC, the pole star was in Hercules constellation, the star known as Iota Hercules, and it lies at the front-facing foot of the Hercules constellation that steps onto the Draco constellation. There's even a myth about Hercules as an infant killing 2 serpents who was sent by Hera to kill him and his twin after he was born. So this comes back to the whole slaying of the serpent, the hero myth. On this note, I'm going to end it here, but if anyone wants more details into these theories, they can check out my last Substack essays on the Venus diaries. Thanks again, guys, for allowing me to share this. See ya.
All right, Katriena, thank you so much for the voicemail once again. Happy birthday.
Woo! Woo!
And we appreciate the kind words as always. We're glad you like the show. And I do think it's such a valuable thing to have everyone's opinion here. And of course, we get a lot out of it as well. I love everything you brought to the table regarding the Hanged Man. That makes a lot of sense. And if people want to learn a little bit more about this, I did a presentation on the Hanged Man for Symbolic Secrets, where I get into this dynamic, including the fetus rotating so that it could be born head first. Isn't that interesting that this is one of the final steps in gestation so that the baby can be born? To me, this is interesting as well because humans are born head first, and the first sign of the zodiac is Aries, which corresponds with the head. It's been said that we lead with the head and we trail with our feet, that we trail with our tail, if you will. And to me, this makes a ton of sense. We have, expressions like getting a head start, if you will, and we tend to basically lead with this part of our body. So Aries corresponding with leading the way, leading the zodiacal year, obviously makes a ton of sense. Also, too, something else to consider regarding the Hanged Man, and you brought up the connection with the feet, right, is that the feet in the Hanged Man card are in a prominent position. They're up top. Normally, in most cards, the person is sitting or they're standing, so the feet are down below naturally. They're connected to the earth. But in this card, the feet are actually in a prominent position. So this is a little clue that basically alludes to the Piscean symbolism that you're expressing here. Also, you're spot on with the Hanged Man being the 12th card of the major arcana, and here we are dealing with the 12th sign. Of course, the main correspondence that people refer to is the moon card, which there's a lot of Piscean stuff going on with the moon. I'm really intrigued with the Sumerian seal that you brought up as well. I had never noticed that a child is being hung from their feet, and then also that their hands are behind them. That is classic hangman symbolism. You'll notice that the hangman oftentimes has his hands behind them. They are concealed. And it's not uncommon as well for the hangman to have crossed legs. A lot of people have said that this may be sort of alluding to Jupiter being the planet traditionally that corresponds with Pisces, because you'll note that the Jupiter glyph essentially is like the number 4. And so there's two different ways you can draw the number 4, and his crossed legs indicate one of the ways that represents the 4. And of course, everything with the placenta, to me, is well received. Shout out Slick Dissident for sure. He's done a lot of work on placental symbolism. He goes really, really deep with that. One thing I want to mention too is the fact that you brought up the second birth, the placenta being the second birth. And second birth is actually a old reference to initiation as well. And so there's an initiatory aspect to the Hanged Man, and there's an initiatory aspect with what could be referred to as the second birth. It's like you're being born again. Lastly, the twin dynamic with the placenta being the twin of the child is very, very interesting, because a lot of people have brought up that Pisces, the idea of two fish, reminds them of Gemini. And when you're talking about the Gemini twins, as you brought up in your voicemail, the Gemini twins are oftentimes said to be born from a cosmic egg. So what does that represent? To me, this represents that this dual presence, this light and dark presence, came from the same place. What it's really saying is that duality came from polarity, because within any container, there is actually a polar dynamic. It kind of reminds me of like a magnet, as an example. A magnet has a positive end and a negative end. And most things that are contained within something actually have this sort of expression, that there is this more masculine side, more feminine side, and this leads to an eventual split, which you could refer to as duality. So I see that with the fish as well, that these two fish, what's being expressed is that they actually came from the same place. It came from source. It came from the principle, or something along these lines. But that duality comes from polarity. That's the main thing I wanted to mention.
Yes, thank you, Katriena. Happy birthday, as was already stated, and always loving what you have to bring to the table here. I, too, really enjoy the placenta as a twin aspect of what she was talking about. And, one of the things that came to mind was the separation that happens there. And also then what it reminds me of is what Jord said, that these Piscean fish are actually held together by that one string. So although they seem like they're separate, they're not separated.
Another thing worth noting regarding the placenta is that people have talked about how it is very similar to a tree. So it's very tree-like in nature.
It definitely looks like a tree.
And so when we're talking about tree symbolism, really all trees are emblematic, in my opinion, on a symbolic level of the world tree. And this would be the tree that connects heaven and earth. It connects all that is above with all that is below. There's a number of myths and tales about a mythical tree like this. And on a human gestation level, the umbilical cord is a world tree symbol. It connects heaven and earth. It connects you with mother, which when you're in the womb, mother might as well be the universe itself.
Oh, yeah.
And so you are in a cosmic womb. And so from the placenta having this tree-like dynamic just visually to the umbilical cord also representing this literal lifeline, to me, the world tree symbolism is like on full display there. And so in that way too, then the umbilical cord is a world axis symbol. It's an axial symbol. And so I thought that was worth pointing out.
Yes, I agree. And I want to kind of continue on this weave of fertility that Katriena brought up. And I do have a couple quotes here from the Penguin Dictionary of Symbols that definitely illustrates this. Fish are, in many cases, symbols of life and fertility because of their extraordinary powers of reproduction and the vast number of eggs which they lay. This is a symbol which, of course, can be transferred to the spiritual plane. Now, this kind of goes along with another quote that I wanted to point out, is that fish are a symbol of fertility and wisdom. Hidden in the ocean's depths, they are charged with the sacred powers of the abyss. And when I think of the abyss, a few things do come to mind, but the very first thing is always a mother's womb, the darkness of the womb, the fact that we're almost conjuring something from the darkness of the abyss. And that is what it feels like to me when we're talking about birthing a child or holding or housing a fetus in the mother's womb. Another thought that comes to mind with fertility is also something that I read in the Penguin Dictionary of Symbols, that fish represent water, they represent rain and flood. And all of those three things actually help to increase the fertility of the earth. So not only is it the fertility that a mother and father bring, but it's also the fertility of the earth that we see everywhere around us when anything is in bloom, anything's growing, or when anything is changing or being created within the earth.
For sure. So for many reasons, this childbirth weave really is potent. It's powerful. It's absolutely there. And I just have to say, one of the last things here is the fetus-feet connection.
Yes.
I had never considered that, but I do think that's brilliant. So thank you, as always, Katriena. On to the next one.
Hi, Mario. Hi, Michelle. This is Emily Ridout at the International School of Astro Yoga, calling in to talk to you about Pisces energy. So Pisces is the fish, and it is the mutable sign of water. It's also the final sign of the zodiac. Now, mutable seasons or mutable signs all represent the end points of seasons in the tropical zodiac. And Pisces is the final season of the zodiacal year before we move into the new year at the start of Aries season. With water energy, there's this energy that is associated, I think most people talk about it associated with emotion. And while that's true, the even more accurate description of that is that it is associated with imagination. And imagination is the basis, the image by which we build material reality and by which we understand or have outlets for our thoughts. As such, Pisces is associated, yes, with emotionality, but also with a return to the dream realms. So a return to that non-ordinary reality that we find in our dream spaces, in our shamanic spaces, in our meditative realms, and in our spaces of unbecoming or return to source, where possibilities are endless and unlimited. And when we look at Pisces, it's very interesting. The other water signs, the symbols of them all have protective mechanisms. So in Scorpio, we have a scorpion, a snake, an eagle, all with talons or fangs or pinchers or stingers. And in Cancer, we have the crab with its pinchers and its external shell. But with the fish, they are fully immersed in water in the ways that the other water signs are not. The fish lives its life in water, and it doesn't have a huge external skeleton or sharp talon or pincher to protect itself from the things in the waters. And this is in part because on the Piscean level of identification with the sea of consciousness, we actually don't need protection. In the material realms, in the realms where we are interacting with Earth, we need protection. There's various dangers out in the earth plane. But in the realms of the waters of life, in the realms of not fearing disillusion, not fearing non-identification, we need no protection. And so that in itself is quite interesting. When you look at the tarot, I always like to look at the tarot cards associated with these signs. Pisces is associated with the moon card. I think this is often forgotten about because people sometimes think the moon is the moon card, but the moon is actually the high priestess. The moon card represents the sign of Pisces, and it is a very mysterious card depicting what occurs through myriad moon cycles, which is shown by its number 18, the mysterious number of the unification of the sun and the moon through the travels of the lunar nodes through the zodiac. The moon card depicts, through the myriad lunar cycles, the evolution of a being from its most rudimentary state, and this is depicted by the symbols in the moon card showing a lobster with some rocks and grasses symbolizing the lower animal kingdoms, the mineral and the plant kingdoms, to then a wolf, and then a dog, so a dog being a more refined form of a wolf, and then towers representing humanity, and a path that goes far beyond that. So the moon card holds in it a symbolic depiction of the fact that while we are born with a raw human body, we have the capacity to specialize our form. Now we know this, right? Because nobody is born being a fantastic pianist or an excellent scientist or an excellent astrologer, right? We develop these things. But the moon card, more so than that, speaks to the development of specialized forces within ourselves to develop our latent capacities, our spiritual capacities that come online. Now, in yoga, we have these words for the siddhis, and it's not said that siddhis always indicate like mastery, right? They are simply spiritual gifts, and they may or may not be connected to other things. But the moon card represents the traversing path toward mastery, the path we take along the way, the path that the past ascended masters have taken, And really the invitation to dissolve, that's a Piscean word, right? Dissolve aspects of our own identification so that we can enter into this next phase of unfolding, which occurs then as we enter into Aries season anew. Now, the traditional ruler of Pisces is Jupiter, a spiritual card, a spiritual planet, a planet of expansion, a planet of seeking highest truth, which is associated with the Wheel of Fortune card. And this card depicts the ups and downs of life, the movement into higher states of consciousness and back down again, moving in between and among the fixed signs of the zodiac, and then a symbolic seal of Solomon at the center, showing us an invitation to come to the center of the chakra or the wheel, so that we're not just spun about on its extremities. Now, in addition to this, the modern ruler of Pisces is Neptune. And for Neptune, we have the Hanged Man card. And I love this card. I think it's often misunderstood. It shows a person hanging upside down, who's tied themselves upside down to a tree, whose branches have been cut off. And something interesting, I think, about the word hanged man is the alternate meanings of those words. So hanged can mean hung, as in this person being hung upside down, but it also means still or at a middling point, as in like a hanged jury, right? It's teetering on this precipice. And then we have the word man. The root of the word man actually means mind, as well as hands. And so when we look at the card, the Hanged Man, we wind up thinking about not just a person who's hung themselves upside down, and it's like, well, for what? We can think about the stillness, hanged, mind, man. And so what happens when we still our minds? And so you do see depicted here a person who has hung themselves upside down, resting and abiding in stillness on a tree who typically has 12 branches, the branches of the zodiac, which have been cut off, representing, instead of living on the extremities of the zodiacal wheel, also represented in the Jupiter card, that we are called into the center, our center. And as an astrologer, I love to talk about this because if you look at an astrology chart, what is depicted in the center is actually the person. The center of the astrology chart is the human being. So all of that is quite interesting. Now, in addition to this, Pisces rules over your lymphatic system, which is such a key. One, it is a key to evolution. In the opposite sign of Virgo, we have the intestine, which is accredited to beginning the spiritualization of the development of certain qualities in the brain, such as the decalcification of the pineal gland, the awakening of certain energies coming through certain brain glands, namely the pituitary body, which would be more associated with the moon and with Pisces, and then the pineal gland, which is more associated with a sort of solar consciousness. But we have the lymphatic system, and lymph plays a key role. We forget this often, thinking of it only as an immunity system, but it plays a key role in that digestive system in the intestine there. And it also plays a key role in our immunity and in ridding our bodies of things that don't need to be there. So we all breathe in certain metals or chemicals or pollutants in the air. Our foods have certain pollutants that get into the waters and the foods. And Pisces, this energy of the lymphatic system, helps us to release it. Likewise, Pisces rules the feet, the sensitive bodies upon which we stand, very symbolic of Pisces energy, and our dependence on the sea of consciousness, not the other way around. Matter is born of the sea, not the sea born of matter. And so we have the feet, which have nerve endings connected to everything in the body. If you study reflexology, you can affect the body through certain pressures on the feet. And they also can connect us to the electromagnetism, right? Our auric field tapping into the earth through processes such as grounding. Okay, I think I'm at time, but that's just a glimpse into just the briefest snippet of Pisces energy. If anybody wants to learn more about this with me, International School of Astro Yoga, you can find us at astroyoga.org. I hope you guys are having an amazing start to your Pisces season.
Okay, Emily, thank you so much for that awesome voicemail, as always. You kick things off by talking about the imaginary realm and the return to the dream state, or return from which we came to source. That all makes a ton of sense. You know, I've said this before, but it really is so crazy how inverted the world is. You go to school, you're taught that the material realm came first, everything else came after. I see it the exact opposite. It's the realm of spirit that preceded the material realm. And so that makes a lot of sense as far as I'm concerned. This whole idea of fish not needing protection in the waters, I think, is very interesting related to that return. You would need protection when you're in the physical realm, the material world. Obviously, you have a physical body that can be harmed and damaged and everything else. So the fact that you're linking it to that, I think, is very, very interesting. Related to this journey as well, you mentioned that the twin towers in the moon card represents humanity and that you're moving beyond that. For people who aren't aware, the moon card oftentimes has these two towers with a path that goes between them. And whenever you see twin towers, or even a glyph like the Gemini glyph, the twins, it does represent an opening. It represents a passage, something to pass through. But I've never heard anyone actually say that the Twin Towers represents humanity. That's intriguing because, of course, who else would build these towers, right? And so it is encouraging you to move beyond them and in that way return again from which you came. So I think that there's something to be said about humanity also being originally nomadic, that we went through these migratory seasonal journeys. And once you set up a farm, once you set up a city or an empire, you have more of a sedentary lifestyle. So I really see it that really all travel symbolism relates to the journey of the soul, essentially. You're either journeying towards or away from the center of self, the way I tend to look at it. And what's interesting is that we use our feet to journey. We use our feet to travel. Some people have said that our legs are our wheels. It's how we get around. And we have 2 feet. There's 2 fish when we're dealing with Pisces. And so what's intriguing is that just like our feet, it's connected to the same body. The legs are connected to the same body. And when you look at the Pisces constellation, it's actually like a large V. And so it's a split stream dynamic. It's 2 fish that came from the same original stream, the same way our 2 legs, our 2 feet come from the same stream. So I see that there's a relationship there as well. Hey there, it's Mario once again. I wanted to take a moment and let you know that I have a few offerings that are intended to support you in your symbolic journey. I offer tarot readings, private lessons, and have just launched a mentorship program for people who would like to explore symbolism on a long-term basis. Visit symbolicstudies.com to book. Okay, back to the episode. Another thing that I think is interesting that Emily pointed out is that the hanged man relates to stillness. And that's absolutely true for sure. If you're hanging there, you're not going anywhere. The way I perceive this card is that this figure put himself there. It's not from any external influence. He's there on his own accord, although it may not look that way. And she said that man relates to mind. That's really intriguing to me as well. I don't think I've ever heard that before. But the other interpretation of where man comes from is that it might come from the moon. And so a lot of words that begin with M vowel N have this intriguing relationship with the moon. And so man or men may be one. This is why we have the word menstruation, right? It's like a lunar cycle. The word minute, M-I-N, goes back to keeping time. The moon was the primary timekeeper for a lot of cultures for a long time. So that's just another consideration. But I think they both make sense, actually. Man representing mind, a still mind in this regard with the hanged man, or man also representing the moon, because we go through so many changes in life as well. And the moon is constantly evolving. The moon is constantly morphing. Kind of reminds me of the two fish of Pisces, that are sometimes circling around each other and chasing each other's tails or what have you.
And what that makes me think of is like kind of the iridescent silvery light that we get from the moon, and that corresponds to fish as well.
Right. And then, of course, we're talking about the moon card as being one of the correspondences for Pisces. So, yeah, it's all related to each other. Also, as well, what mutable means, and Pisces being a mutable sign, it means liable to change. And so to me, this makes sense. That's very, very Piscean, very, very watery, I would say. But all of the mutable signs sort of carry this energy, this changing, sort of evolving dynamic.
Great points all around. Thank you, Emily, as always, for bringing it. I was so happy when you brought up reflexology, because it's one of the places my mind went to when I started studying for Pisces. There's a few things that come along with this, but I want to start with the connection of the feet and the lymphatic system. And to talk about your point of the nerve endings in each foot, I'm going to refer to my book, Better Health with Foot Reflexology by Dwight Byers, which is a great book I would recommend for people if you have any interest in learning foot reflexology, because it has wonderful charts in the back of it that basically map out the feet and show you the areas of the feet that correspond with the organs and areas of the body that you may want to stimulate. And from the book, there are 7,200 nerve endings in each foot. Perhaps this fact, more than any other, explains why we feel so much better when our feet are treated. Nerve endings in the feet have extensive interconnections through the spinal cord and brain with all areas of the body. Surely the feet are a goldmine of opportunity to release tension and enhance health. And this, for me, makes me think about Pisces and kind of even the relief that comes when we are balanced in our emotional state. And also when we even put our feet into water, that can be very relieving, depending on whether it's cold or hot water. And so this makes me think about the motion that also comes from when we're stimulating or massaging these parts of the feet and trying to basically get our internal organs to respond. Maybe if there's sluggishness or something like that, that's where reflexology is really great. This also brings me to the lymphatic system connection that Emily brought up. And I wanted to further go through the book to talk about the lymphatic system, because I think that sometimes it's like thrown around, lymphatic system, what is that? And I think it's such a perfect pairing with Pisces because it's all about the fluids of the body. Lymph is derived from the blood plasma and is a colorless fluid rich in cells. The lymph supplies a fluid environment between the cells and the tissue. It actually bathes them. And there we are again, back to the Pisces water connection. And another thing I wanted to make sure that gets mentioned here is the cell salt that is associated with Pisces, which is ferrum phosphate, which is essentially iron. This is the number 4 cell salt of the 12 cell salts. And that also pings me for Pisces stuff because we're dealing with foundation, you're dealing with the feet, and then here we are talking about Jupiter and also the hangman who is making the 4 with his legs while he's hanging. Now in the salts of salvation, they go into iron and the importance of it. And I wanted to read a quote from the book here. Without iron, there would be no means whereby ether could penetrate either into man's body or the body of the earth. Let us analyze the word iron or ferrum and find the solution of its secret. Its Latin term is ferrum, and is derived from the root of the verb pharaoh, meaning to create, to form, to bear, therefore to give birth to. Is there any further proof required that it is the salt necessary for the existence of all things? It actually bears life, carries life. And that goes back to what we were just talking about with Katriena and all the fertility stuff that was brought up. So I thought that was very interesting. Later in this same chapter, it's talked about how magnesium has a great attraction for iron and that they work together. Now, this is one of the reasons why I feel like I got a broader sense of Pisces and what it actually really means, because the attraction to the magnesium from the iron is creating this motion that Pisces brings, that internal movement, the swirling of the tides, and all these things. And I know that you have a lot to say about that when it comes to the form that Pisces takes and the shape that it actually produces.
Yeah, that's all really interesting, and it does remind me of the fish chasing each other's tails or what have you, the yin-yang glyph. And I just posted a video about the connection with the Pisces glyph and the Taurus field. It kind of just looks like a cross-section of a Taurus field, if you know what that looks like. It kind of looks like a donut, right? And what's said about the Taurus field is that there is an emanating aspect and a returning aspect to it. So the center expresses this energy, and then this is where the energy also returns to. It's been said that this is almost like a white hole up top and a black hole down below. Or what's also been said is that this is indicative of blue shift and red shift, or red shift and blue shift. And so it's these two qualities, a projective quality and a receptive quality. And so what you're saying here to me reminds me very much of that.
Pisces is one of the oldest and most mystical symbols in astrology, and it's the final chapter of the zodiac, the place where the journey of identity dissolves back into spirit. After moving through every sign, every lesson of selfhood, desire, ego, love, loss, and becoming, Pisces is where we return to the ocean, the great cosmic waters where endings and beginnings merge. In astrology, it's represented by two fish swimming in opposite directions, one pulled toward the material world and the other drawn toward the infinite. This is the essence of Pisces, to live between reality, between dreams and devotion, between surrender and rebirth. The Pisces glyph represents this perfectly. Two curved lines facing away from each other, connected by a central bar. It symbolizes two souls tethered together across dimensions, reminding us that spirit and matter are always linked. Pisces is ruled by Neptune, the planet of dreams, spirituality, illusion, and divine longing. The name Pisces comes from the Latin word fishes, and it's one of the oldest zodiac signs on record. In Greek mythology, Pisces is linked to the story of Aphrodite and her son Eros, who transformed into fish to escape Typhon, the monstrous force of chaos sent by Gaia to attack the gods. Warned by Pan, they leapt into the Euphrates River, where the fish became an enduring symbol of divine protection and survival through the storm. And Pisces repeats the same spiritual truth across cultures. In Hindu tradition, Vishnu becomes Matsya, the cosmic fish who rescues humanity from the flood. In Christianity, the fish becomes a symbol of salvation. In Babylon, fish gods were linked to healing and divine wisdom. Everywhere, Pisces reminds us, even in the storm, love survives. Even in the chaos, spirit finds a way through. Pisces teaches us that softness is not weakness. It is courage. It is faith. It is the soul choosing to love anyway.
All right, Mar Alejandra, thank you so much for the voicemail. There's a few things I want to touch upon here. One of them being the fact that you mentioned Aphrodite's relationship to the Greek version of where Pisces comes from and the symbolism behind all of that. And it has to do with the fact that when you look into fish symbolism, there's actually a lot of different takes on whether you should or should not eat fish. Different cultures all around the world had different ideas about this. Some cultures encouraged it, while other cultures frowned upon it because they considered it to be a lowly creature, maybe an evil creature, also a holy creature and something sacred that you don't want to eat because of its significance. So there's all sorts of things out there like that. But one thing you'll come across is that some cultures have viewed the fish as actually being an aphrodisiac. And so that's interesting because I'm pretty sure aphrodisiac, the word, comes from Aphrodite. this relates to the idea that fish symbolism also has been viewed as being very phallic, depending on where in the world you're at. So, as an example, the phallus has been referred to as a one-eyed fish. There's a tribe that refers to the knife that they use for circumcision rituals as the knife which cuts the fish. And so even when you get into deep symbolism, people have said that a fish in water actually kind of is a sexual sort of dynamic. It's as though the phallus is returning to the ocean, if you will, the yoni. So there's a lot of things going on here just with sexual symbolism and the fish and the waters of the ocean and things of that sort. So that is to say, making love, it's as though a fish is returning from which it came, back to the ocean. Then, of course, there's everything else regarding the quote-unquote fishy smell of the yoni. And that's a whole entire thing. Actually, Barbara Walker has a few amazing quotes about all of that. But that's kind of an undeniable connection as well, right?
And speaking of Barbara Walker and the fish, I do have a couple quotes here from her book, The Woman's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets. And Barbara says, the Catholic Church inherited the pagan custom of Friday fish eating and pretended it was a holy fast. She also goes on to say, Friday is the day of Venus, Freya's day in Teutonic Europe. The notion that fish are aphrodisiac food is still widespread even today. Finally, she adds, the Celts thought fish eating could place new life in a mother's womb. Now, that third quote is my favorite of all of those because, again, goes back to what we've been talking about. And I think that that's such a beautiful thing to think about with the fish and new life and it creating life and it being the way that we can create life.
Also, just have to say, the sperm cell itself, very fish-like. We even refer to them as our swimmers.
Right.
So it's all just a complete full circle weave here with this symbolism.
Pisces sun signs always end up representing significant cultural movements. So for example, in music, Johnny Cash, Kurt Cobain, Lou Reed. If you look at Johnny Cash, there was all this country music going on, Rhinestone Cowboys, and he kind of represented a change from that to what country became. Kurt Cobain, similarly to rock and roll. There was hair metal before him. More recently, we've seen Justin Bieber, Chappell Roan, George Harrison and John Frusciante were both part of groups that radically changed music. But beyond music, you've got Einstein, Steve Jobs with photography, and Ansel Adams. They all became the icon. They were emblematic of a shift. In literature, Steinbeck, Victor Hugo, Dr. Seuss, Jack Kerouac, David Foster Wallace. As world leaders, George Washington, Gorbachev, Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor, Osama bin Laden, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In film, you got Spike Lee, Jordan Peele, Mr. Rogers, Steve Irwin, Chuck Norris, and Ric Flair. These are all new media forms that the icon of them was a Pisces. Elliot Page, the most iconic trans person. So Pisces always represent the amalgamation of a social change. I don't know if this is because it's the 12th sign of the zodiac, and we can step into all the different, we can bring together all the signs, or it's because it's the age of Pisces. But it's very interesting how every time there's a change, there's a Pisces that gets all the credit for it.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much for that voicemail. Very cool and interesting. Actually, feel free and leave another voicemail for the next sign with more famous people that are associated with that sign, because I think it's a very interesting dynamic here. That's something that I don't spend so much time myself looking into, but I know it's very relevant for a few different reasons. The first thing I'll say here is that if, as Emily was saying earlier, if Pisces relates to the imagination, are we talking about visionary people? People that can perhaps see the future or see a different way of doing things. The other interesting thing, too, is that the Hanged Man, as we've been talking about it relating to Pisces, the Hanged Man is forced to see things from a different perspective. And so literally there is a pattern breaking dynamic with the Hanged Man, which is what leads to his second birth or initiation. So just a few thoughts off the top of my head here.
Yes, this was excellent, Ryan. Thank you for bringing this perspective. And the thing I think about with this is basically the saying that the only constant thing in life is change. And when I think of Pisces, I think of change because I think of the cycle of those two fishes and the dynamic of their movement and motion. And the fact that the ocean, which is also related to Pisces, is continuously changing because of the tides and the shifting of everything and the seasons and what have you. I think that this is a beautiful way to kind of illustrate the deep meaning of Pisces and why it's so important.
Well, to add to that, I don't know if I've ever said this before on the podcast, but let's just take the word emotion. We're dealing with a water sign. Water in the tarot relates to the cups and to our emotions. The word emotion, if you remove the E, you now have motion, and our emotions can get stirred up. And when you're feeling emotional, you might cry. There might be the waterworks, right? And so there's this flow, there's this movement. Water wants to move. Stagnant water is not good, right? And then if you remove the M, phonetically, you now have ocean. So emotion, motion, ocean. All of these things are completely related to each other. And so obviously you remove the M and it's O-T-I-O-N, but it sounds exactly like ocean. And I don't think that's a mistake.
Hello, Symbolic Studies. My name is Nikolas, and I wanted to tell you that I really love your videos about symbolism of the zodiac and mythology, and generally how the zodiac signs connect to energies and different aspects of our history and our world. And secondly, I wanted to suggest to analyze the symbolism of Pisces through Jesus Christ, because his symbol in Christianity is a fish, and also how he had the ability to make the so-called miracle for the fishermen, and the fishermen were able to catch a lot of fish, and they ate them along with the bread, and the bread also symbolizes the body of the Christ. So that was really an interesting question I really had, so I wanted to ask you about it. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.
All right, Nicholas, thank you for the voicemail. Yeah, that's a powerful connection. Christ and the fish, Pisces symbolism and whatnot. We already talked about a few different aspects here with that, but I'm going to add a few more to the table. And I'll start with the fact that in one of my resources, it was saying that in medieval times, Jesus was once referred to in this medieval hymn as the little fish which the virgin caught in the fountain. The virgin, of course, being his mother. And if it hasn't been said yet, I think maybe Katriena mentioned it, but Pisces is opposite Virgo. And so that's a really powerful axis, that polarity between Virgo and Pisces. And one thing you'll notice is that Virgo, her glyph is an M, and it has an embedded fish in that M. To me, this relates back to Christ. At least that's how I personally see it. And related to that, it's been said that fish symbolically, especially in the ancient world, they were considered the sun lovers of Mother Ocean. So fish symbolically represent the children of Mother Ocean. And when you look into the mythology, it's not uncommon for the creatrix or the mother to actually have her son as her lover because she created the first masculine presence, right? That she has no partner. That's what the virgin actually represents, is she has no equal. So she creates the closest thing to her equal, which would be her child. So that's one aspect. Another thing too is that I've read that early Christians actually occasionally dressed up in fish costumes. And this was to honor, of course, Christ and their faith. and all of this fish symbolism. And to me, this relates back to an old idea that ancient peoples were more inclined to see God at the bottom of the ocean and not up in the sky. I've talked about this before. This is also related to the devil and other adversarial figures. Isn't it interesting that we associate the devil with the pitchfork, a trident, and Poseidon is also associated with the trident? My understanding is once again that ancient peoples saw God not in the sky and not anywhere else besides the ocean, and that this was where his domain was. Same thing with the devil. I think over time, we started associating the devil with not being in the ocean or body of water, but being under earth, which is where most people associate him. And then, of course, God for a lot of people is now up in the sky. And so you have that going on. But I think that makes a lot of sense that these two figures traditionally were associated with being oceanic in some way, shape, or form.
There's a conglomerate of images that may be associated with Pisces. It's duality, really just an image within itself of its own inherent multiplicity. There's so much depth, no pun intended, with Pisces. And we can pull from across so many cultures, so many stories and so many narratives, which is fitting for such a common and ubiquitous symbol as fish. In Greece, the larger fish is said to be Aphrodite, an image of the Great Mother, and the smaller, her divine redeemer, her son, Eros. And this within itself suggests that there's a profound eroticism inherent within the sign of Pisces, as well as something richly feminine with this mother and fae son pairing. But if those two represent the gentler face of Pisces, Poseidon is the sea monster. He's a third image of the sign. It's really threes that stand behind Pisces, in my opinion. It's the Great Mother, the original mother, the creatrix. There's her divine consort or her divine son, who is her redeemer. And then there's the sea monster, who is either the antagonist of the redeemer, or he is the dark face of, or she, it. However, it is not really gendered. It is the representation of a darker, more rapacious face of the mother goddess herself. That image in Greece, we can say clearly is Poseidon. Even though he is associated with bulls and with horses, the insane, lascivious rapacity, the devouring aspect of the sea, endlessly trying to consume, tempestuous and wild, that monstrous face of Pisces, that is Poseidon. You know, just the chaos of unbridled emotion and instincts, rocking within the body, rising from the depths, rising from an unknown abyss, which reinforces the connection between Neptune and Pluto, between Pisces and Scorpio, because these are qualities traditionally associated with the 8th sign, but they're found no less in the 12th and with the fish. Thank you so much for your consideration. My name is Tom. You may find me at Instagram, tmackey1018, or you may find me at Quora under the name Tom Mack. Thank you once again.
All right, Tom, thanks for another voicemail, man. I always love your stuff. This whole Trinity idea with the mother, consort, and sea monster is very, very intriguing. I see exactly what you're saying. And the fact that this sea monster, you know, relates to the appetite of the sea, always consuming and whatnot. And this relates to me to the idea that water, let's not forget, is the universal solvent. And so it breaks things down. And so to me, that relates to what you're saying there. Also related to this, and it's a bit of a tangent, but if there's a modern pantheon that I think could be considered as such, I think the Lovecraftian mythos is related to this. And the most popular creature in that world would be Cthulhu, who exists at the bottom of the ocean. And so it's just, to me, that would be the most modern version of a sea monster. Or actually, another one would be Godzilla. Godzilla comes from the bottom of the ocean. So there's this idea that in the ocean itself is this unimaginable creature that is destructive and terrifying beyond anything we've ever considered.
And to piggyback off of sea creatures, I think of the Loch Ness Monster with this and the legend of that. And it's so mysterious and you only see it every once in a while. And when it comes out, it's like otherworldly. So is it really there? Is it legend? Perhaps we'll never know. And also, Tom, what you mentioned, the eroticism aspect of Pisces, what it brings to mind is feet and then people having foot fetishes. And that's kind of like a joke thing, but it is a real thing for certain people. And one of the things I came across in Barbara Walker's book was an entry on foot binding and how this was in a Chinese tradition. I'm not sure if it still is, but it was the act of binding a woman's foot so that it basically was inhibiting the growth of the foot. And so the bones would break. And essentially what they were going for is something called the lotus hook. And so the foot would actually curl down and the toes would curl under into the foot and it would create this hook-like shape. And many Chinese men found this very attractive. They found it attractive, though, for the reasons that it actually kind of debilitated a woman and made them subservient almost. They were dependent more on the man because they actually weren't able to walk correctly. They weren't able to get around quickly. And what Barbara mentions is that because the feet were so debilitated, they were not able to escape an attacker or they were not able to get away quickly if there was a threat. And so it made them just very dependent on whoever they were with.
Wow, that's really, really interesting and makes perfect sense why you would bring it up. What this reminds me of a little bit is the fact that the knot symbolism, which we talked about during Capricorn, I'm pretty sure, it has the power to bind and loose.
Yes.
And so knot symbolism is also related to Pisces. So if you're a fisherman, you're going to have to know how to create knots. And so knot symbolism is really associated with sailors and sort of different oceanic activities and whatnot because of ropes and fishing line and everything else. And also, I'm pretty sure that some cultures have imagined the cord that connects the two fish in the constellation of Pisces as a knot, that they associate knot symbolism with it. So it's all kind of related, in my opinion. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. We'll see you soon for an episode on the symbolism of Aries.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, this wraps up the live recording Michelle and I made on Thursday, February 19th. I'm incredibly grateful to everyone who contributed something, including our regulars and those of you who submitted something through the site. Naturally, there's a couple of things that I wanted to get off my chest regarding the symbolism of Pisces, and I know we discussed the Hanged Man at length a couple of different times, and something I failed to mention is that the Hanged Man, it's almost as though they symbolically represent a fish out of water. And I think you can say the same thing about humans in general. You know, the human condition is interesting. It oftentimes has to do with reconciling the fact that we are spiritual creatures in this physical body, that we have a physical body, but we are spiritual in essence. And so in that way, I feel as though we are fish out of water, if you will. That our essence is spiritual, which has a major correspondence with water, I would say. And we are in the flesh and in the material world. So it's almost as though we are not in our original domain. We're not in our comfort zone necessarily. So I think that metaphor is appropriate on a few different levels. The other thing I wanted to mention comes from Funk and Wagnall's Standard Dictionary of Folklore, Mythology, and Legend. And this is a beefy book. There's lots of interesting information in this book. I came across this at a bookstore, picked it up on a whim, and I'm really glad I did. And in their section regarding fish, they outline several seasonal fishing rituals that different cultures had around the world. And this is something that I hadn't really considered, but it makes a lot of sense. So as an example, there's a tribe that lives on a fairly remote island, and to kick off their fishing season, they actually have this banishing ritual in that they send one of the men out to the mountains and they have to live by themselves. And my understanding is they're actually not allowed to start a fire either. And so this is something that has been part of their tradition for apparently a very long time. Other cultures will sacrifice animals at the beginning of the fishing season. There are other cultures that have various ceremonies that they'll perform at the beginning of fishing season. So just something to throw out there, just how important fishing is and fish are to some communities. Thank you to our regular contributors, Emily and Katriena, and a special thanks to Jord for his excellent insights. I know we'd both love to see him back on the show in the future. Emily Ridout can be found at astroyoga.org or emilyridout.com. Katriena can be found at the Venus Diaries on Substack or at katrienaemmanuel.com. Jord can be found on Twitter and YouTube under the handle WarJord. For exclusive content, grab a Symbolic Studies membership either on Patreon, YouTube, Substack, or my site. They all host the same exclusives, including 18 symbolic lectures on the tarot. Membership also gets you early access to the podcast, like the one you're listening to right now. Without a doubt, this is the best way to keep up with everything I have to offer, and it's just $5 a month. Once again, in case you weren't aware, I am available for tarot readings, private lessons, and just launched a mentorship program for students wanting to learn symbolism over a long-term basis. Also, in case this is the first time you're hearing it, I actually found symbolism through graphic design. I've been designing for nearly 30 years, so if you're in need of creative assistance with your project, check out my portfolio on my site and get in touch. Links to all of my accounts can be found at symbolicstudies.com, including my Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, etc. And that's going to do it for this episode. We'll see you next month with a show on the symbolism of Aries. Until then.